Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette. This is 199, and believe me, I never expected to get to 199, but here we are. Where we read and review philosophy papers live on air, and I take requests, and I had a viewer request. We do some Deleuze and then Baudrillard. I just did a paper on Deleuze and Baudrillard, but I did one on Deleuze before that, so now let's see what we got as available for Baudrillard here on the Phil Archive. Alright, so we've got 4 pigs before the consummation. What on the role of semiotic economy of seduction? Okay, that's available. The media of the spectral. Becoming large groups from. This is some Russian thing I can't read. Becoming large groups from crowd and public to powerful and spectacular mass movements. Interesting. Alright, so let's take a look at these real quick. Before consummation, what? On the role of semiotic economy of seduction? The media of the spectral? You know what? Let's just click on the download buttons and see what these things look like. And you too out there, if you're watching this, you can request that I read a paper. Alright, so this is 16 pages and very small font and very wide pages. So that's kind of heavyweight. I just did a longer paper. Let's see what this one looks like. Okay, so this is a scan of something in small words. I haven't done a scan, I don't think, ever. Although I have done stuff without, but this isn't too bad. I mean, it's a double columned, but it's only 6 pages. So that's like 12, basically. So I might consider that one. And what is this one? And this is Russian. I do not speak Russian. Is it in Russian and English? No. So that made my decision kind of easy. I would love to be able to read other languages, but I have failed as of yet. So that means we're probably going to do this one. The Media of the Spectral, Glimpse, Journal of the Society for Media and Phenomenology. So let's go down to Phil Papers. Get the Phil Papers link. So this is from 2011. If you are live, here is the link for you. If you join live later, you can always type !paper and it will show up. So this is going to be kind of interesting. Oh man, am I not going to be able to even read this? Because it's kind of, the scan isn't great. Well, what am I complaining about? It's not like any worse than anything else. Okie dokie. So, the media of the spectral, Derrida and Baudrillard. Okay, so we're doing some Derrida as well. Now, there is no doubt, in the face of the apparent monolithic nature of much contemporary media, there is a very strong temptation to throw up one's hands and refuse to engage. Nothing has changed in the last decade. Similarly, where party and parliamentary politics become increasingly a self-regulating machine, moving with a perpetual motion with no apparent engagement beyond their mechanical orbit, the appeal and temptation of Baudrillard for some readers becomes perhaps understandable. Indeed, much as he is regularly treated with scorn, we might say that the shrug of dismissal and withdrawal from the public sphere is perhaps the most characteristic political gesture in the contemporary West. Yep, that's basically how we got into our mess now. Against such sentiments, Derrida insists that responsibility calls us to engage no matter how minimal our potential contribution and marginal our position. Not to do so is to risk closing off the possibility of an event of alterity, to renounce the possibility of a different future. In this paper, I will follow first how Derrida's Husserlian analysis leads him to argue that the media at once opens the possibility of an engagement of alterity while also potentially closing it off. We will see how the media can be the medium of the spectral. I will outline how Derrida argues we can keep open such a possibility at the same time as elaborating concrete analyses of media, institutions, and practices. We have seen for Derrida, the media is not a dramatically new problem. The ultimate result of his Husserlian analyses. Let me see if I can zoom. This is so bad. Nope, doesn't really get any better. Well, it's not getting any worse either. That's a little too much. Yeah. Whatever. We've seen for Derrida, the media is not a dramatically new problem. The ultimate result of his Husserlian analysis, as I have argued elsewhere. Can I even highlight? Let's see if I can highlight stuff. No. Okay, just wanted to see. The ultimate result of his Husserlian analyses, as I have argued elsewhere, was to question whether any firm distinction between ordinary perception and mediated perception is possible. In his work on Husserl, Derrida goes no further than the apparently simple technology of writing. Yet writing, as Derrida shows us, and we must remember that everything that can be said about writing is also implied in the spoken word and all other linguistic acts, does not give us access to the thing itself. Language mediates language mediates our access to the world. We might say mediates in the sense that it both enables and prohibits this access. If there is no immediate proximity, there is always something like a writing at work. There is no structural difference between Derrida's approach to the simplest utterance and to the production of the most technically complex media. These machines have always been there. They are always there, even when we wrote by hand, even during the so-called live conversation. Consequently, he says, of grammatology, immediacy is derived. Of course, we must struggle to come to terms with the specificity of teletechnologies. Derrida is the last person who would let us gloss over them, but neither does that mean we can be allowed to forget that they remain on a continuum with ordinary perception. Derrida's raising of the questions of perception and conceptuality leads to a deconstruction of the distinction between real and virtual that drives Baudrillard's theses on simulation and the media, although these remarks are not presented as an explicit reflection on Baudrillard's work. Indeed, although Echographies, a series of interviews with Derrida's most sustained engagement with the question of the media, does not engage in a close reading of Baudrillard, Derrida's coinage of the neologisms artificiality and actu-virtuality could be used as the starting point for such deconstruction. Both of these terms, introduce questions as to when exactly technology and the media emerge, drawing out. Oh man, I'm sorry, I can't. It's hard to read this. Drawing on his readings of Husserl, he sees something that could be termed technical at work in the habitual operation of language in perception. Language enlightens and occludes at the same time. It makes public but also holds back. It contains an indecipherable secret that means communication can never be fully transparent. You might just say that like any sort of communication, some sort of decision we're making, there's an opportunity cost. You can only say so much at once, and that's part of the technology of writing or other media, and that's why the television, it gives you a lot more. In some sense, the liveness of my broadcast right now, I interact with chat, and feel free to ask questions. That gives a certain sort of directness, but of course, even then, there's the Twitch chat. There's only so many things you can do. I mean, there's icons you can put up in the chat, like here, like this sort of thing, and so you get the different I'm blanking on the words, but emoticons and memes and stuff. But all these things do present an opportunity cost. You can express certain things, but by doing that, you cut off the option to do other things. You only have so much opportunity at one point to do what you're going to do, but that also means you lack opportunity to do something else. So I don't know if it's secret, but it makes public but also holds back. So there's always something that can't be done. It contains an indecipherable secret that means communication can never be fully transparent. We don't need to pick up a pen and write for our language to be marked with something technological. The teletechnological inventions of modernity are complications of the structure, immense ones, singular ones, but we must not lose sight of what they have in common with the supposedly unmediated. It is this inescapability that Derrida tries to highlight with his neologisms. For Derrida, there is no the media, there are always media, right from the moment we begin to think and before. Indeed, Derrida goes so far as to suggest that media, as the plural of medium, is the very channel of the revenant. I like the word medium here. It speaks to me of specters of ghosts and phantoms. Here, Derrida does not signal a sudden bizarre interest in the occult, but refers to a quasi-concept developed in his late work. To speak of the spectre is to speak of the escape of the thing itself. It denotes, if it is possible to denote such a thing, something that is neither alive nor dead, neither present nor absent. In Heideggerian terms, the spectral points us towards the necessity, when talking of the present, of examining how that present presents and presences itself. When he talks of specters, his insistence is, I want very much not to give up either on the present or on thinking the presence of the present, nor on the experiences of that which, even as it gives them to us, conceals them. We might say that while Baudrillard would try and hold his Requiem for the Media, the title of a section of his early towards critique of the political economy of the sign, Derrida would suggest that the corpse might not be so securely entombed as Baudrillard thinks, and that rather through mourning and the inevitability of specters, the medium may well be the medium of the other. Okay. The use of the term artifactuality no longer simply opposes reality and virtuality, but draws attention to the ways in which what is conventionally regarded as virtual is a necessary part of the creation of what we call reality. Derrida argues that actuality is made. It is important to know what it is made of, but it is just as important to know that it is made. With regard to the media, Derrida again repeats, actuality is precisely made, not given but actively produced, sifted, invested, performatively interpreted by numerous apparatuses which are fictitious or artificial, hierarchizing and selective, always in the service of forces and interests to which subjects and agents are never sensitive enough. And this, he might have added, happens in ordinary perception too. In particular, we must note that Derrida is explicit in warning against a Baudrillardian reading of artifactuality. The requisite deconstruction of this artifactuality should not be used as an alibi. It should not give way to an inflation of the simulacrum and neutralize every threat in what might be called the delusion of the delusion, the denial of the event. Everything people would then think, even violence, suffering, war, and death, everything is constructed, fictionalized, constituted by and for the media apparatus. Nothing ever really happens. There is nothing but simulacrum and delusion. While taking the deconstruction of artificiality as far as possible, we must therefore do everything in our power to guard against this critical neo-idealism and remember not only that a consistent deconstruction is a thinking of singularity and therefore of the event, of what it ultimately preserves of the irreducible, but also that information is a contradictory and heterogeneous process. It can and must be transformed. It can and it must serve, as it has often done, knowledge, truth, and the cause of democracy to come, and all of the questions they necessarily entail. We can't help but hope that artificiality and artificial and manipulative as it may be, will surrender or yield to the coming of what comes, to the event that bears it, and towards which it is born, and to which it will bear witness, even if only despite itself. Alright, so it's saying don't give in to the just like pure simulation. Too idealistic. Alright. We might note that he does not name Baudrillard here, and perhaps we might see in this recognition of places of proximity in the work of the two, and a desire not to appear dismissive as his work. But we must stress how Derrida insists on information as a contradictory and heterogeneous process, not as code or even simulation, as Baudrillard does, and on the possibility of transformation of an event. In these regards, we could contrast the two theorists on the question of real-time TV. In Gulf War, Baudrillard speaks of real-time TV as the spectacle of degradation of the event, the way in which the compounding of commentary upon commentary, gloss upon gloss, simply underlies the unreality of philosophy. And I'd just like to note for all my viewers that this is like the unreality of philosophy at the moment, what I'm doing. Not the, did I say, yeah, because I'm thinking the unreality of philosophy, the unreality of war. Because I'm doing philosophy in real time. You guys get to see the spectacle of philosophy. It's kind of what I'm doing here. So I take all this stuff to heart when I'm reading it. I'm like, why real-time philosophy? There's real-time TV right now. Real-time TV is said to be a simulacrum. There is no critical position that can be taken against it, and we cannot find a position outside it from which to criticize it. So, can I get outside of my real-time philosophy to criticize my real-time philosophy? Maybe, but it'd be hard. I mean, I'm thinking about writing something about this, at least as some sort of recap, but still. Alright. Quote, the closer we supposedly approach the real or the truth, the further we draw from them, the further we draw away from them both, since neither one nor the other exists. The closer we approach the real time of the event, the more we fall into the illusion of the virtual. Baudrillard thus cedes all to the system he seeks to escape, making his only recourse a prayer for apocalypse. All that we can hope for is that some event or other should overwhelm the information instead of the information inventing the event and commenting artificially upon it. The only real information revolution would be this one. I would argue that it is such words we find precisely that inflation of the simulacrum and that failure to see information as a contradictory and heterogeneous process that Derrida warns against. Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to think in doing philosophy this way. I mean, how can we get into the what can actually be understood in doing philosophy this way? I'm not sure. I don't know, but like in my real-time philosophy, how do we actually what is being presented? I don't know. I'm not sure. So, but I think about this. Derrida's own position is quite different, although he is equally critical of those who would imply that real-time TV is somehow less mediated, less problematic than any other form of TV. And I'd say that about philosophy. People who are doing philosophy on the internet is not any less mediated or less less problematic than any other kind of philosophy. It's just a very different sort of thing. Live is not an absolute live, but only a live effect, an allegation of live. That's what this is. This is a live broadcast, but it's only an allegation of it. In some sense, you can chat with me, but it's still mediated. He suggests that a widespread awareness that the issue is problematic can be seen in the very fact that we use the term real-time at all. Again, rather than seeing the problem of mediated perception as unique to contemporary teletechnologies, he generalizes it. There is never an absolute real time. Yeah, I think there's about a 4-second delay on Twitch that I mean, I'm sure some people have better connections than me, but it's also just if you're on Twitch and you're watching this on Twitch, not on YouTube. I mean, Twitch people seem to refer to YouTube stuff as VODs, video on demand, as opposed to streams, which are live. So we've got the stream versus the video on demand. And so there's a very clear distinction about this on Twitch. So that's kind of an interesting thing that Twitch culture and people have very sophisticated understandings about how live their live actually is. I mean, they've got their own lingos to be more precise about it. There is never an absolute real time. What we call real time and what we call real time, and it is easy to understand how it can be opposed to deferred time in everyday language, is in fact never pure. He stressed that the live and real time are never pure, and they do not give us intuition or transparency, but they are not unique in this. Here Derrida recalls the conclusions of his early work on Husserl. The condition of possibility of the living, absolutely real present is already memory, anticipation, in other words, a play of traces. The complexity of his analysis is in no way prevents him from also engaging in a basic critique. What is transmitted live on a television channel is produced before being transmitted. The image is not a faithful and integral reproduction of what it is thought to reproduce, still less of everything that remains reproducible. Again, Derrida conceptually sketches a topography that insists beyond the apparent and the perceived lies, an alterity that exceeds and challenges conceptuality in the impossibility of an event. This is very different from the total alienation in the code or escape into immanence, the head or heads or tails, either or logic of simulation as Baudrillard presents it. While Baudrillard's analysis can only lead him to hope for the implosion of the media, Derrida's opens the possibility of a multi-level critique. Indeed, the consequence of the complication of this boundary between real and virtual returns us with an urgency toward the question of the structures and process of the media. When Derrida complains of the media that they pretend they are showing us the thing itself, for example, the attacks during the Gulf War, he does not stop paralyzed like Baudrillard, who can apparently only offer either the total fiction of the code program simulation or the complete immediacy of the simulation-enabled symbolic, but follows to an insistence on the need to examine the vast complex of processes that lie between the TV reports of the Gulf War and the events in the Middle East. In contrast to the Baudrillard's non-engagement and withdrawal, Derrida can argue that, when confined in the technopolitics of telecommunications, something inescapably at stake for philosophy, very new in certain of its forms, its operations, its evaluations, its market, and technology. After 9/11, again in contrast to Baudrillard, Derrida can both mourn the singular lives lost and engage in a practical analysis of the operation of the media, noting how it does not count the dead in the same way from one corner of the globe to the other. He further argues that 9/11 calls for just as many questions and analyses, that which it seems simply to represent through a straightforward and neutral informational process. This straightforward and neutral informational process is always so... that's always such a tenuous thing to say that they're just presenting the information. He makes this point of the need to understand the processes of news-making repeatedly. Hegel was right to remind the philosophers of his time to read the newspapers every day. Today, the same responsibility also requires us to find out how the newspapers are made and who makes them. Oh wow, talk about the criticism of the media that we're going through right now. So this sort of thing. It's like, who is making all this stuff and why, and who is the media? Again, in the view with the Australian newspaper in 1999, Derrida said, "The media is the main political problem facing the world today," a statement he confirmed in a subsequent interview, qualified, "Not the most original thing I've said, but it has something nevertheless that needs to be constantly repeated." Derrida argues that we must break with the framing in which television and newspapers would present us the world, see from the side of the teleprompter or the press agency, and remind ourselves that the politician who looks us in the eye as he speaks from a script prepared by others, that all can seem most natural is a product of processes that must make us question what natural could be. Yet what we must particularly underline is that, in addition to making commonly presented criticisms of the media, Derrida argues for a critical culture of the spectrality of the media, a matter I will come back to in concluding. So right here is where we've got our sort of mess with the media and the politicians, that we have politicians who you think you can trust, but you really can't trust them, and they come off as real or whatever, but that's a manufactured thing. All of the things you're seeing about who's real and who's fake in politics is, there's a lot of money in that. There's a lot of money in power, and so you can't really trust all those memes on Facebook basically telling you that people are full of crap. So we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, but I will say something for Twitter. I haven't actually looked into this, but apparently Twitter is full of war videos, so you can go find people who are in war zones uploading short clips of what it's like to actually be there in a war zone. Of course, the ones that are going to get presented are always going to be, I'm sure, the most terrible, as always. That's how these things go, but that does also break the narrative of what's being shown in terms of how war is presented from the mainstream media versus just people with cell phone cameras. So, on numerous occasions, Derrida argues that new teletechnologies at once open up novel possibilities, at the same time threatening a certain homogenization. He says of the new role of media in the public space that there are many reasons for a Democrat to rejoice in it, but its effect is terribly ambiguous. Yet for Derrida, they open the possibility of a new place and an event of alterity. Indeed, he argues that one of the most important effects of the new media technologies is the creation of a new topology of the virtual, producing a practical deconstruction of the traditional and dominant concepts of the state and citizen. His suggestion is that it is a technology that displaces places, and that consequently the question of democracy may no longer be tied to that of citizenship. The new media technologies in Derrida's eyes have the potential to open up a new form of democratic association and participation. Similar to Habermas for Derrida, the globalization they bring is a chance as much as a threat, he argues. Since no locality remains, democracy must be thought globally today. Indeed, his suggestion is we should work together as people who are more than citizens, because I would advocate something that would go beyond citizenship, beyond belonging to a nation state. In insisting that we need to be more than citizens, we come to what Derrida says concerning hospitality, a theme he develops partly out of and against Kant. The need for a responsibility that exceeds all established claims to rights and residence. So there's more. This cosmopolitan is what this is. I wouldn't know about So there's hospitality and cosmopolitan being cosmopolitan. So this is interesting. Hospitality, and I mean, you could also go sort of like a critique maybe from Confucian philosophy, where they have a lot to say about etiquette. And so if you have like a hospitality, it could be seen as a form of etiquette and tradition that is outside a citizenship thing. Like you have to, like there's certain rights and responsibilities you have, like in terms of like nations and being a citizen, but then you have something separate that would be a to be hospitable to your neighbor or somebody from a different place. Okay, continuing. Indeed, it is precisely the globalization of new technologies which opens the possibility of such hospitality. With the globalization of the media for Derrida, while there might be at times fierce critique, there is no mourning for a lost sphere of immanence, but rather a welcoming of the possibility that new media can be the medium for an unprecedented incoming of the other. And I mean, I can tell you just the locations are all over the world for my for philosophy. It always is. But I mean, you see, like, what's your top country? Well, it's people who speak English, so it's English-speaking countries, but then also lots of other places because lots of other people speak English too. So it's all over the world. And so, in some sense, the way in which you become a big streamer is to appeal, to have a welcoming stream, to present something welcoming to all sorts of people. And there's stream etiquette in some sense, and you have to think about that as a streamer. And when you go on Twitch, as like chat here is, if they want to chat some more, that's cool. If not, cool too. But please ask questions, because this is sort of related to just what you're doing right now if you're watching this live. So how we interact with the chat makes a big difference, and there's been, of course, huge scandals with at least in the Twitch community, with toxic streamers and toxic people in chat. And it's like, and how is the failure of hospitality there? How have you made certain things inhospitable? Maybe to like boost your own brand, because it is good to like be controversial, to be spicy. You make your chat spicy, people come for that like spiciness. But then you're also doing certain things that are inhospitable and potentially not democratic. So, all right, continuing. If media technologies can open up new forms of democratic organization, Derrida also deplores how they can be the conduit for the most deadening repetition, in particular criticizing the way in which the national overdetermines all the other hierarchies and relegates to a secondary position a whole host of events. Indeed, he argues in the news, actuality is spontaneously ethnocentric, a point we have already seen him make in relation to the reporting of 9/11. Indeed, he describes as a tragedy that the apparent internationalization of the source of information is often based on an appropriation and concentration of information and broadcast capital. That's true. I mean, how do you get information out of a place? Well, there's a limit to who can actually go there. The way in which a process which offers a new diffusion of the opening of a novel space is ironically the scene of an unprecedented homogenization that leads Derrida to make a call to resist the concentration of the international corporations which more and more control this power. And that's kind of what's been happening recently. People have been working against that. In recent interviews and writings, he often discusses the way in which media institutions could be made more open to democratic possibility, subscribing to the conventional liberal and leftist positions regarding the necessity to fight against accumulation, concentration, and monopoly as forces that potentially lead to censorship, yet pragmatically acknowledging that one cannot simply argue for plurality, dispersion, or fractioning. Fractioning? I can't even read that word. I wish I could. not least because the potential because of the potential the latter offers for anti-democratic possibilities. He argues we must try to avoid a monopolistic, monolithic media, but still need to find centers where public opinion can materialize, that hegemonic forces cannot be challenged by simple dissemination. Derrida is clear that the task is to introduce some heterogeneity without disseminating or imperiling the media's universal reach or scope. The difference from Baudrillard's work could not be starker. When outlining the strategies for overcoming ethnocentrism in the media, Derrida acknowledges some journalists make laudable efforts to escape this law, but by definition, it can't be done enough, and in the final analysis, is not up to professional journalists. He argues it is our duty as citizens of the world, as citizens of the nation, and citizens. It is our duty as citizens of the world. So this is back to the cosmopolitanism. As citizens of the nation and citizens of the world, to cooperate with the people in the media who are ready to do critical work. Yet ultimately, Derrida does not place his main hopes for the expansion of the democratic potential of the media on journalists or regulation. If the struggle is not waged from the side of what are still called provisionally the buyers or consumers, it is lost from the start. Indeed, Derrida's own experience with media representation made him increasingly skeptical about those whose profession is the media. He said in one of his last works, apropos of the question put to Heidegger by Der Spiegel in 1966, like most journalists, they are first of all interested, or perhaps only interested, in what they take to be politics and the political. Like all journalists, they insist on clear, univocal, easily understandable answers on a particular subject. Yeah, well, this is interesting because nowadays it's not even clear and political. It's what gets clicks. So this is like what is click-worthy, is the what people want now. I mean, you're just scrambling for eyeballs, basically. So they want the catchphrases, the quick ones. So it's not on a particular subject, it's on a particular subject that gets eyeballs on the screen so that they can sell ads. In order to escape what Derrida sees as most important is the raising of the question of the addressee. What is possible and, in my opinion, desirable are not legislative decisions concerning the production and distribution of whatever it is, but opens programs of education and training in the use of this technology, these technological means. Here, Derrida's position has similarities with the neo-Brechtian one criticized by Baudrillard in Requiem for the Media. However, for Derrida, it is not merely a question of concrete individual addressees becoming more involved in production, but rather is the concept of the addressee that would have to be transformed. Derrida is not just suggesting addressees use newly available technology to turn themselves into producers, but more importantly, he desires those who were previously in the position of consumer spectators can intervene in the market. His suggestion is the addressee has never simply been a passive receiver, and he says that his desire is for addressees to be able to transform, in their turn, what reads them, the message, or to understand how it is produced in order to restart the contract on different terms. Alright, so basically it's a different form of engagement with the media where people are sort of active participants. And we've had stuff like this before where people like citizen journalists has become a bit of a thing in the past. But the question is, again, the old media at this point has sort of, well, not, the old media hasn't reasserted itself, but nowadays you are platform dependent. You have to go onto a platform to really do anything. Like you're on Facebook, you're on some news site, you're on some sort of forum somewhere, and that's how it is. So I'm not sure that this is actually, I mean, this is a few years old now, so I don't think, not sure how this quote actually has survived, but it's like where exactly is the news being disseminated and how, and so how do we get who's reading the news or the message, how is it actually transmitted? So that's still a good point, but exactly where that exists now is a hard question, I think. Like, where do you really get your information from now if it's not the traditional news media? Or how can you trust that stuff? How can you trust any of this stuff nowadays? It gets very difficult when you try to pin something down. Alright, so restart the contract in different terms. Like, exactly who are you contracting with? Continuing, when Derrida talks of the way that the message reads the addressee, he's speaking of something more fundamental than the Neo-Brechtian program. I would suggest when he argues that an original expropriation is necessary in the media and that the choice is not between mastery and non-mastery. In order to understand this, we need to look at how Derrida translates and transforms Heidegger Erasmus into the event. Derrida's point would be that how the media is structured and how addressees are educated to engage in a democratic sphere are important because, much as it is an unprecedented leap, preparation is necessary for the possibility of an event of alterity. He argues, ethical responsibility, which is to say judicial and political responsibility, is exposed not only in what is called life or existence, but in the task of deciphering, reading, and writing. When Derrida speaks of a gift or the event, there is an acceptance of language as both potentially instrumental and excessive, a medium for incoming of alterity, the eruption of an unthought of future. He would argue that we must take responsibility for our use of language and the media in which it is manifested, to engage actively with it, to develop new strategies of reading, to heighten our awareness. Yet this test does not and will not lead to a control over mastery, nor should we want it to. Baudrillard condemns signification as the code or sees alterity as evading simulation. But Derrida would argue that alterity is inscribed within language, within media, from the start. Alright, so this is interesting stuff. Has a lot to say on the new media, which I kind of just find interesting given what I'm doing right now. And the question is, where do you get your new information? These are just notes. Okay, all the notes. And like nowadays, people are learning things through chat. Like, so hi, chat. And like, so if you were here, we could discuss this and how do you learn new things. So this is sort of how people are engaging now, is in discussion on, like in new media. So they're doing it through apps. They're doing it through, TikTok is in the news. I'm sure people are learning things through TikTok, WeChat, Facebook, all sorts of things. So this is sort of a different sort of language is being used because, of course, you've got all the different sort of, if you go on Twitch or you're on YouTube, you will see the sorts of things that get said in those chats are not the sort of things that get said other places. And so we've got a different language being used there. And how does that different language in this sort of telecommunication, the teletechnologies, how does that actually open up different possibilities and close off other ones? The chats here, you can't make a wall of text. If you make a wall of text, it just gets lost because people, if the chat's moving, you can't read it in time. So what you have to say is it has to be bite-sized. And this is sort of what happens. Walls of text are lost, and people have been decrying the lack of reading forever, so that's not actually a good criticism. But in some sense, it is a new way that the way we understand stuff. And let's see, do I even have any emotes? Yeah, so here's Kappa, chat Kappa. So do you know, I take it actually that people might know what Kappa means. This is Kappa. The Kappa face kind of means joke, but not everyone knows what Kappa means, and so there's a possibility of who can talk and who can't talk, given the emotes that are available and how you understand these things to interact. So we got a whole lot of things here going on, and the analysis that Derrida, this is obviously Derrida against Baudrillard in this paper, is saying that Derrida actually has a way of analyzing this where Baudrillard is sort of failing in an idealistic sense. It's just saying, well, nothing can be done. We have to wait for the whole thing to blow up. So, so introduce some heterogeneity without disseminating or imperiling the media's universal reach or scope. So this sort of way we can get into the discussion here is different for Derrida as opposed to where Baudrillard, is important for Derrida, whereas for Baudrillard, this whole sort of new sort of construction of how we're discussing the news, or how I'm discussing philosophy here, would say, look, you're getting away from the thing itself, and you're just sort of presenting a simulation of it. I mean, yeah, is this a simulation of philosophy? I don't know. I mean, you'd have to know what philosophy was to begin with, and I don't think we have any idea what that is. So how's it done? Maybe philosophy is done via simulation. But yeah, so the author here is basically arguing that Derrida is better for analyzing the media and that which is closed off by our new technologies, better than Baudrillard, who is looking to blow up the system and hoping that there's some sort of thing that prevents us from like shaping our reality through the technology. I don't know if that's exactly right, but the you have to find something that is going to escape the simulation, which is very hard now. Yeah. One of these days I hope to get some emotes. Maybe when I get lots of viewers. I want my own emotes. Okay. Anywho, that's it for now, and I hope everyone's having a good day and stays safe. But unless there's any comments from chat, that will be it. Okay, thanks for watching.